It looks like we've got about 20 people, and I'm really excited to bring you the heat tolerant lettuce trial, some of the results. So without further ado, I think I'll hand it over to Chris and Weijia to introduce themselves and take it away.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Chris Thoreau. I'm supporting the CANOVI project on an interim basis, but have worked on it in one capacity or another since 2018. And looking forward to presenting it to you today. And I'll pass it over to Weijia to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Weijia Wang. I'm the current postdoc researcher working on CANOVI projects. I graduated from Michigan State University in the US earlier this year. So I moved to this position in August this year when actually the lettuce trials were already finished by Chris. But the good thing is there were data collected, and so I did data analysis. So I'm presenting some tables and figures to you with Chris today.
Great, thanks, Weijia. So yeah, just a quick overview. So here's what we'll cover today. We'll do a quick overview of the trial, which hopefully you are all familiar with, and share a participant map with you. Then Weijia will go into the national trials and talk about the results there. Then I'm going to talk about the trial results and just an overview at the UBC Farm Mother site here in British Columbia. We'll do a quick overview on how you can review data yourself on SeedLinked, and then we're going to move into questions and discussions that to bring you all into the conversation as well. So I'm just going to jump right in here. So as you probably know, we're doing a heat tolerant lettuce trial. And I mean, this is an important trial just in terms of as we see climate change affecting growers more and more, and lettuce being an important crop, being able to identify heat tolerance in lettuce varieties is going to be an important trait in the future. This trial used all organic or ecological seed. I think most of it was certified organic. And we used mostly Canadian grown varieties from small scale seed companies. The one exception there being Gentilina, which came out of Fruition Seeds in the US Northeast. So there were three market classes of lettuce that we looked at in the trial: Butterhead, Batavia or Summer Crisp, and Oak Leaf, or in particular, yeah, I was going to say red oak leaf, but there was some variation there. And the reason we chose these out of all the different market classes that are available in lettuce is these were the market classes where we saw less heat tolerant varieties on the market. So for example, in romaines, there was a lot of stuff out there that claimed to be heat tolerant. So these are ones where we saw the gaps. So that's a short version of how we came down to these market classes. So the trial had 76 participants across Canada. And we used, as many of you know, we use SeedLink to record our trial data and assessments, and 52 of you completed that assessment, which is about a 70% completion rate, which in terms of data from SeedLink is spectacular. So obviously not everybody could get all their data in, but thank you to all of you that were able to do so. That is spectacular. So just a quick overview. So here again is the list of varieties that we used, broken down by market class, as well as the seed companies where we got them from. And we were looking at traits that, again, you're familiar with: germination, vigor, bolt resistance, uniformity, yield, marketability, appearance, flavor, and overall performance. And we rated these on a scale of 1 to 5. So we did not rank varieties against each other, but rather used a rubric to rate them from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. So that's just an overview of that. Again, hopefully most of you are familiar with that. So here's a map of participants across the country. You can see we had really good distribution in the East and West, and a pretty good scattering centrally as well. Getting quite north in British Columbia, and obviously right down into Southern Ontario there and Maritimes. To complement that, we also had growers in 7 different hardiness zones as well. So I know in the past we have broken things up by East and West, but in a way, a more useful way to look at it can be by hardiness zone. Hardiness zone maps just changed in the US. They might be changing here, but this is close enough for now. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of the trial and the participants, which hopefully many of you or most of you are familiar with. And now what I'm going to do is pass it over to Weijia, and she's going to start talking about results that we got from participants on Seedlinked. And I'll just share this here with you, Weijia.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so the first slide I'm showing you is actually this is from Seedlinked. You may have seen this on your end. So we ask you, would you grow this again for each variety? What I want to mention here is magenta got the highest votes for yes, I will grow this again, and which is in the Batavian market class. And in the Butterhead market class, Sangria got the highest votes for 78%, and in the oak leaf market class, Bisbee Rosa was the one got the highest votes for 71%. Another information here is important is that in the Batavian market class, all of them got over 60% of people voted they will grow it again. And this result also kind of being reflected in the other results that the varieties in this market class tend to have higher ratings for all the traits. So I'm gonna show you, let me see, next slide. Okay, yeah, so I wanted to show you the range and distribution of the overall performance rating here. So in this figure, the x-axis are the varieties, all the 12 varieties, and on the y-axis is the overall score that you gave to each variety. So each data point here is a data that we collected from you, the participants. So what we're looking for here is, so first of all, as you can see here, for every variety, the data range from 1 to 5. So which means for each variety, it can have a score of 5, which is the best, but it can also have also be a 1 on another farm. So we have seen that for each variety. But what we're looking for here is there varieties that tend to have more scores, more data points on the upper end? So for example, from left to right, Bronzy Beauty, like Cardinal and Magenta, these are, and also Sangria, like these are the ones have more data points ranged in 3 to 5, which means most of the farms participated, these are the ones tend to have more good overall performance. So that's why I wanted to show you this range and distribution of the data. So on this figure, I'm trying to show you the ratings of each agronomic traits. So as Chris mentioned, there are the agronomic traits that you gave scores to. They are germination, vigor, bud resistance, uniformity, yield, marketability, appearance, flavor, and overall. And the average here is the average of the score of all the traits. So I have that data, and then I'm trying to compare the different market classes. As you can see here, the dark green is the Batavian, and the light green is for Butterhead, and purple color bar is for oak leaf. For most of the traits, Batavian tend to have had the highest score among the 3 market classes. Oh, and also I forgot to mention the letters on top of the bar means how different they are. For example, if they have the same letter, they are not different, but if they have different letter, means they are actually statistically different. For example, for germination, Batavian had the highest average score. So this is the average score from all the participants. And for the germination, oak leaf had like the lowest score. But like for vigor, Batavian had the highest score, and Butterhead and oak leaf, they didn't have much difference. However, for example, for uniformity and for flavor, and also for the average, there were no difference found among the 3 market classes. So that's that. So now we have seen how the data distributed and how the market classes compare to each other. Now we want to dig more into it and see how the variety is actually different from each other. So first of all, in this table, the asterisk under the name of each agronomic trait shows whether the variety has a significant impact to that trait. What does that mean? For example, under germination, the variety had significant impact on the results of the germination, which means from variety to variety, the germination can be significantly different. And on the contrary, like for uniformity, we didn't see significant difference from variety to variety. So that's that. And I also have highlighted the highest score or the highest scores in each column. So for each agronomic trait, you can find which variety had the highest score. As you can see here, magenta was the one that had most of the trees. Magenta was the highest, had the highest score for the nationwide average. And okay, so this table here, I was trying to compare them from compare the different hardness zone. So you can see here, I still have the each variety, and the score you see here is the average of all the traits for each variety nationwide. And I have also highlighted the highest score in each column, so which means that one is had the highest score in that hardness zone. In fact, I'm not showing the ANOVA table here, but in the statistical analysis, I didn't find a significant impact of the interaction between variety and hardness zone, which means statistically, one variety didn't perform differently from one hardness zone to the other hardness zone. But that's only the data analysis based on what information I have. There could be, as you may assume, there could be difference in reality, but there are some environmental factors that were not included in the statistical analysis. So this result is only for your reference. You may still want to look into your own results to make the decision. Yeah, so that's what I have for the national data results. And now let's turn it back to Chris.
Thanks, Weijia. So yeah, what I was going to do now was do an overview of the trial and results at UBC Farm, just to compare a little bit to contrast a little bit with the national results. Okay, so just starting off, first of all, with climate data for UBC this year. So you can see the air temperature is in blue, the soil temperature is in orange, and precipitation is in gray. And as a general overview here, we had a fairly warm summer here and also very dry. So you can see we did not get any significant precipitation during the bulk of the trial right up until the end. And we did our first evaluation on July 19th before we actually had that bigger rainfall on the 24th. So yeah, we had a warm, dry season here. And I would say that the feeling in the field actually to me felt much warmer than this graph communicates. This data is from UBC, but from a site a little further away from UBC Farm. So even though it is local data, it's not specific to the actual growing spot, which was one of the hotter spots and more exposed spots at UBC Farm, which was perfect for the trial. So the point here being, it was a good season in southern BC to do heat tolerant assessments. So so we sowed our seedlings on May 23rd in the UBC seedling greenhouse. You can see from this photo there is some variation in some of the varieties here. Now at this time in May, we actually had a bit of a heat wave in May, so the conditions for germination were warmer than typical, and I'll come back and address that a little bit later. So they everything got transplanted out on June 16th, and like everyone else, we did 10 plants per plot, which were randomized. Now, one of the unique things about UBC Farm as a mother site in this mother-daughter trial is that we did 3 plots of each variety. So every variety had 30 plants amongst 3 different plots. And so that allowed us to do a much more detailed data analysis within that. And it also accounts if you if you did have a plot fail, you would have some backups to do evaluations on as well. So during the season, even though we do our germination ranking early, and then most of the other rankings come later in the season around harvest time, but we are always observing the crop just to look for signs of stress or signs of success of the crop during the season. Our beds were really well irrigated and well maintained. And so to be honest, even with the hot summer, we didn't see any issues, too many major issues coming up during the season, other than I think with just one variety that had fairly stunted growth. We were able to, and obviously like any crop, we want to be able to maintain it well. And at UBC Farm, we're really able to do that with the help of UBC Farm staff that do a good job of helping us adjust systems to make sure the crop grows well. So our final evaluations actually happened over 2 weeks. We did one on July 19th and July 25th. So fairly warm time of year. And this was just to get a sense of, so July 19th, basically, everything was at a harvestable size, or most of our varieties were at a harvestable size. And so it's at that point we were assessing what is our heat tolerance looking like in these crops. Are we seeing signs of heat stress? Are we seeing bolting? Are we seeing anything like that? So this is a very, very key time when it comes to harvest time. What is the status of the crop? And so we're looking for different signs of heat stress. In some of these things, they could be caused by other factors, but we are looking for consistency across varieties through the 3 different replicates. So we might see one trait like this leaf tip burn in one plot, but not others, or we might see it in all 3 plots of a variety. And so that kind of helps us determine how a variety is performing against all the others. So yeah, these are just some things we're looking for. Again, we're seeing a little bit of a burn on the leaf tips here, as well as a section of my thumb there, which is not experiencing any heat stress. And then here, here we're actually seeing some pretty, you can see the one plant there that didn't do well, but this variety is also quite stunted. So again, we don't know that this is a heat-related thing, but we saw that in a number of the plots here. So because we had a warm year and stunting is something we would see as a result of heat stress, that's the sort of thing we are looking for. I'll say in a lot of the other varieties, I mean, you wouldn't see any spacing like that between the plants. They really filled out. And if you look to the right, you can actually see what I think is probably Gentilina there, which is a massive, massive lettuce. So you can see those are 2 lettuces to the right compared to the 2 rows of lettuces right in front of you. So you can see how differently they're filled out there. So in terms of data, obviously you can't compare this to the other tables, but we did see significant differences in our results at UBC Farm relative to the average results across the country. For example, you can see we had some varieties that had some germination issues. Oh, actually, sorry, you were going to talk about the results here, Weijia. Did you want to get into that?
Sure. Yeah. I knew you could do a really good explanation of it as well. But yeah, so I made this table. You have seen this similar table, but this one is specifically for UBC results. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, for germination, we had some that got a score of 1, but I think Chris will give more explanation for that later. And there are 2 key points that I want to mention about this. One is something the same as the national results is the Batavian market class had the varieties in that market class had the highest score among all the varieties. And but there is something different compared to the national results, to the UBC results, is that almost all of the varieties had a score of 5 for bout resistance, except grassy plant Parasus. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but maybe I think that's the one that Chris showed you the image pictures of the signs of heat stress. Yeah, so other than that, I think we didn't have bolting issue for most of the varieties. So yeah, so those are the 2 key points that I want to mention here.
Yeah, so I'll touch on germination briefly. So yeah, when we did our plants in the greenhouse, we were experiencing a heat wave in May, and it was very, very hot, and at temperatures that just are not ideal for germination of lettuce. So we did sow in those conditions, knowing that we could sort of test for germination in hot conditions as well as the field conditions as well. And it's important to differentiate those, because just because something didn't germinate well in the heat doesn't mean it won't grow well in the heat. And so you can see the germination rankings were fairly low here for varieties. We did resow those in cooler conditions, and they germinated very well. And because lettuce is something you're likely to germinate in a more climate-controlled environment, you could see that you're still needing to germinate in cooler conditions, but the variety might do better in warmer conditions. So that was one thing. And the other thing is with bolt resistance. So you can see basically, I mean, none of our varieties bolted before they were at a harvestable size. So, you know, my general conclusion there is that they were not, and we had a hot, dry summer, so the heat did not induce bolting. However, we did see bolting in a lot of the poor bolt resistance in other varieties or in other assessments across the country. But my understanding is that, I mean, these were not areas that had hot summers. They were actually kind of cold and wet. So when we look at bolt resistance, there's some interpretation of the data, understanding why they bolted. So here, things had high bolt resistance in hot conditions, and that's the thing we're looking for. I know in some other varieties where they were low, that was low bolt resistance in cool, wet conditions. So just important to understand how we look at that data to compare it to each other. Okay, so that is all I wanted to talk about with UBC Farm. And we've kind of, you know, shown you these tables and some dark green and light green and red text, which can be a lot to look at. But you can actually do a certain amount of data review yourself. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you can do that in SeedLinked. So when we're seeing SeedLinked now on my screen, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So just double checking. So yeah. So when you log into SeedLinked, I'm pretty sure it automatically takes you to your plantings. What you can do then is go to results. The lettuce trial is now closed, so it's not a planting anymore. And then you're going to see the heat tolerant lettuce trials in your list there. Then you can go over and click on result here. And you can see now you've got this information here. So you can see the data that Weijia shared earlier with the Would You Grow Again? And then you've got a table here. So within this, you can select by trait. You can look at all the traits or look at certain traits individually. You can look at the hardiness zone. So you can cover all hardiness zones or just your own. And if you want, you can just look at one single variety. So there's a lot of things you can do to just sort of go through the data this way. And if you scroll over things here, it can show you the different data for each variety, which also allows you to compare your rating to the average rating. I didn't rate this in this system, so that's why there's no rating there. But for you, those of you that did do your rating, you'll be able to see how your rating compared to the average. And I find that quite useful information, because when I see that I've rated something a 5 and the average is like 3, I'm super intrigued by that. And I saw that with a number of things where I was like, how could that possibly be? So yeah, this is why these trials are so intriguing. And then just a note that you can go into each of these here. You can click on these to read more about the variety. And you can also click on the camera. And that allows you to not only see the photos that you took and uploaded, but also the photos that other people took as well. So this is really useful as well. And if you start looking at things like the different photos, and then also understanding what climatic zone people are in, as well as what kind of weather year they had, you start to really be able to get into the information there. So yeah, so all of you that are using Seedlink can get in there and do that assessment yourself and take a look. And there will be some more options to analyze the data using Tableau once we get that set up by working with Seedlink. So with that said, oh yeah, sorry, just a couple of screenshots here. That's all we have to cover for both the national and UBC farm trials. And do want to be able to open up things now to participant questions and any discussion that folks want to have about the trials overall.
Oh, and I do want to mention that we are finalizing the reports for the lettuce trials. With that, you can find more details. We have more figures and tables in that report if you're interested in, and we have we have a short version and a long version, whichever you are interested in. We will have that available soon after this webinar.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Chris and Weijia. I think we'll just move into Q&A now, and then follow that with some discussion maybe. Just there's a couple questions in the chat. Hugo was wondering what the irrigation system at UBC is. I seem to remember micro sprinklers.
Yeah, so just a little micro spinner sprinkler that, yeah, I think we would do 3 hours twice a week, or every 3 days, sorry. That was on a timer, so we could control when that went off. And as a note, UBC has like a fairly sandy soil, lots of rocks, so technically a class 5 soil, class 1 being beautiful, class 7 being horrible, so not great. But the soil has been well amended over the years to have a very high organic matter content to help make up for that. So I think very good soil preparation by the staff at UBC Farm to help us with the trials also did play a role in the success of the trials at our site.
Okay, great. I also want to mention, if you haven't seen the chat, Hugo just mentioned in there that there weren't any hybrid lettuces, obviously, in the trial, or probably even out there in the world. But none of these varieties had any intellectual property mechanisms to prevent anybody from saving seeds. And then there were a few questions, I think, that came in beforehand, but I welcome everybody to feel free to either add questions to the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or speak up. If not, we had just a few prompts that I was curious if people are interested in speaking about. Mostly what did people find interesting about the trial? What sort of stood out for people? John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question maybe just on about hardiness zones, and if you could talk, anyone could talk at all about how you use hardiness zones in the treatment of your analysis, especially around, as far as I understand, hardiness zones are more about winter lows than summer highs, and we wanted to know heat tolerance. And like, for example, a lot of our 8 to 9 hardiness zones in Canada tend to be coastal. So, which meaning the summer highs is pretty low compared to the lower hardiness zones, more inland, which would have a summer highs certainly surpassing what we get on the coast. Just how you would use hardiness zones in the treatment of your data.
I was the person who decided to divide the data into hardness zones. As you mentioned, yes, it can be. It is limited in terms of what we have, because most of our data points were from the West Coast, and from East we do not have that many data points from inland provinces. So yeah, there was limitation, but in my data analysis, I just simply separated the data points into according to where the locations are in the hardness zone, and maybe because of the limitation, I didn't see statistically difference from hardness zone to hardness zone. But again, I think is only for a reference, because we do know that the locations of the farms can be very different, even though they are in the same hardness zone. So yeah, I don't think we should like so because we didn't see the variation by varieties in different hardness zones, so it's basically we didn't see difference by hardness zones, even though I tried to look into there to see if there were any differences. Does that answer the question?
Well, to maybe add something a little bit to that is, yeah, I think hardiness zones are long-term looks also at weather patterns and climate patterns, whereas the seasonal weather is going to be more relevant. And I think, I mean, I don't know how this looks like in terms of statistical analysis, but when taking, like I mentioned, when looking at UBC farm results versus other areas, we did have a site in Ontario that did replicates as well. And they had a really wet, cold year. And so when we look at comparing those results to our mother site results and our replicates, and we see those differences, in order to interpret those differences, we need to understand the weather. And knowing that they had a cold, wet year and we had a warm, dry year, I mean, for example, the difference in bolt resistance is significant. So I would say that trial was inconclusive on the variety's bolt resistance in heat, whereas ours maybe was a little more conclusive in that. So it's I don't know how you do the analysis numbers wise, but when we're looking at comparisons, the weather data really helps us understand how comparable the ratings are.
Which leads to the next question in the chat from Catherine. She's wondering, in future trials, is weather data for each farm site going to be an option to add? I believe there is one question as you exit seed length that maybe asks what type of season you have, but I'm wondering if there'd be maybe the question here is there be an option for more detailed weather data from each site?
That would be amazing.
Yes, actually, we had this discussion. Like, I had this discussion with Chris that it'd be nice if we have the weather data from each location, because that's not something that I had in the data set I had. So all the information I had was just the location, so we assigned hardness zone to each location. That's how as a factor in my statistical analysis. But yes, I think that'd be critical if we are able to get that weather data.
And I would say as well, like if farmers do have weather data from their farm specifically that they've been collecting through their own data loggers, I mean, that could still be useful. And if we wanted to look at weather data, we could use, national weather stations to get a general sense of weather for that region. So even if a weather station is 5 or 10, 20 kilometers away, the general pattern will be similar. So just the specifics won't be. So there's still a chance to do that. I think it's just a matter of capacity and time sometimes.
There's a comment in the chat as well from Michelle, who's the research coordinator for Bauta, is that you found an effective variety and hardiness zones separately, but no significant interaction between the two factors. So hardiness zones influence lettuce bolting behavior overall as a crop, but not by individual varieties, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, thanks for adding that.
Any other things that came up of interest, or were there any varieties that emerged as really promising for you?
I'll add something. My lettuce trial was a bit messed up because I thought I had a timer going to water them all in, and the timer didn't work. So I ended up killing like 80% of the lettuce that I planted. But what was really fascinating was the varieties that survived. So it was kind of neat, even though I totally didn't follow the right growing protocol, to see the like how it was very much like a trait of the variety to like survive massive drought conditions in a very like, so that was kind of cool. I don't remember the variety itself, and I can't find the trial anymore. I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but if I go into SeedLinked and the trial's closed, I like can't find it anymore. So I can't tell what variety it was.
So you need to go, when you go into SeedLink, it's going to show you plantings. That's going to open to your plantings page. But once the trial is closed, you're going to have to go to the other menu on the left, which is under plantings. I think it's results. So the trial, once it's closed, moves to another section of SeedLink.
Maybe it's because, could it be because if I've set up a trial, then it gives me a different screen? Because I don't have plantings. I have active trials and completed trials. And
Oh, it'll be under completed trials then.
it's not though.
And you,
Oh.
you might need to just check, Lisa, that you're looking at a trial that you did on, like if you have a different email address, you just have to open the one that you used for the trial.
That's probably what it is.
Sometimes as coordinators, we're managing more than one SeedLinked user, and it gets a bit confusing. Just so people know, there is a Rebecca just dropped a little link in the chat there about reports from lettuce trials in Southern Ontario for past years, which might be interesting for people to compare. Not sure what kind of varieties were there. Was there anything that people found challenging other than irrigation not working and whatnot? But was there anything else people had any issues or challenges with the trial itself?
So look, I'm just wondering, Anne, if you have a question. I saw your hand come up a couple times, but I wasn't sure.
Did anybody I'm curious, did anybody take the varieties, any of the varieties to seed? Did you I'm curious, Catherine, did you compare the different varieties? I've always been interested in things like seed yield from variety to variety. I know that wasn't part of this trial, so I'm going off topic here a little bit, but just curious.
I haven't processed the seed yet, so that might be for something later on, as I'm processing so much seed right now.
Right, okay, good. I think a lot of us might be in that boat.
Yeah, I'll add a quick comment to there. So even though taking the crop to seed was not part of the trial, we let our crop go to flower. We didn't take it right to seed just due to space and time limitations. But the goal there was to get a sense of how well in our environment these crops were going to seed. So as many of you have probably experienced before, you might find a variety that you really like, but taking it to seed in your environment is difficult. And so I just did observations, a few notes, and took some video notes on that. But I can tell you that a very interesting outcome of that was the two varieties that went to seed the latest, and actually quite late, were actually both BC grown varieties. So Magenta and Sangria were both grown here in BC in coastal conditions, very similar to what we were at. And they were weeks behind the others in going to seed. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing at the moment, because going to seed later maybe means they're going to stay as a mature head longer and have a longer harvest window. But if you want to take that seed to crop, or that crop to seed, you're going to need to really find the right planting window if it's a longer season. So yeah, we didn't take it right to seed to compare yields or anything, but it was very noticeable that those two were delayed.
I have another question or suggestion. Chris, you mentioned a little bit about like some of the observations you had of heat stress in the field, but there wasn't really any, as I recall, there wasn't a space for us to write about that. And I think if I had been prompted with that, I might have actually taken better observations of like heat stress, which could help a trial like that in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a space within Seedlinked when you're doing your reviews where you can add notes, and I think in the paper sheet. But I mean, it's something we kind of discussed during the season, like really doing your evaluation in the context of heat tolerance and heat stress. So again, if you're in the field and it's pouring rain all summer long, I mean, you're not trialing for heat resistance at all, but you are still getting to know the varieties and their traits. And so those data are useful, but I think on our end we need to know how to separate those data. So yeah, we're not comparing lettuce in cold conditions versus lettuce in hot conditions and averaging those together to determine their heat tolerance.
I mean, in conversations that I had with Janine, who's here, who had the mother site at our demonstration garden. Janine, jump in as you see fit. But we were just talking about how when we do some of the like the farmer-led trials here in Ontario, the category of disease resistance is always in there, and on ours there wasn't. For the CANOVI one, there wasn't that, and how that was difficult because the disease affected so many of the other factors. Anyways, yeah, there's so many more categories. Did I explain that correctly, Janine?
Yeah, I was trying to formulate the thought myself too before you jumped in. Thanks, Rebecca. I think you were discussing like how for bolt resistance, we're really wanting to weigh it against the heat factor. And so when I was assessing bolting, it was more like the heads they were stunted. They weren't getting to fully developed heads. So yes, they were bolting before they had completed their head growth, but it wasn't necessarily because of heat. So it could have been because of disease, or it could have been because they were stunted from the cold or just from weather fluctuations. So it just felt, number one, hard to assess. Like it, you're talking about going to assess on 2 different days, but I felt like I kept having to check back and back, like, well, have they formed full heads yet? Have they formed full heads yet? And then it was also just the value of that measurement. Is it really getting at the heat factor, or is there's something else going on? And I felt like it wasn't totally captured. Does that, Rebecca, is there something to add to that, or yeah?
It would be, I'm really interested now in actually capturing weather data, because I think fluctuations probably can potentially have a huge effect on a crop, rather than, even if it's a hotter than normal season but consistent, maybe the plant gets a chance to kind of adapt.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of comments on that. I mean, that's really good feedback. So one is we can add evaluation traits during a trial. So I mean, not blaming anybody, but if you could have said, oh, can we add disease resistance? We could have done that. And I think maybe one of the reasons it wasn't on there is we don't want to have farmers evaluating too many things, because then the evaluation becomes a little unwieldy. Second thing is, so I mean, one thing you can do is you can evaluate each variety independently. So we, on July 19th and July 25th, basically everything was ready. That was kind of luck on our part. But yeah, it might have been like on one day, one variety's ready, 3 days, the next one's ready, depending on what you like. So yeah, that can make things a little more. So we can add the trait. We don't want it to be too much for people to have to evaluate in a season, because then it gets hard. You can evaluate varieties on independent days. And then we can still, we could actually follow up with growers, and just the general sense of, did you have a hot or a cool year, would allow us to group data by those things. So if there are 7 farms that had a particularly hot year, we can look at just that data.
What I can say from the Quebec side is that we, a bit like Ontario, we didn't have a lot of heat and a lot of dryness. We had a very cool and wet season. So although the results are interesting, I think we'd have to like do it for another year in order to have really relevant data. Another thing that I'm noticing is that because we're working with regional seeds, we're going to have regional variability in the data results. So a variety that's been bred and reproduced in Quebec is probably going to do better in Quebec than in another region because it's been selected for these conditions in this region. So I think that's however, the one question for me is how do we improve seed quality? I feel like there was some germination issues, and what is the difference between, because lettuce is such a great crop where we can actually create more seed autonomy in Canada because we can grow seed in our climates, and it's a self-pollinating crop, so it has that great potential of actually that we can grow more regional seed, whereas spinach, it's more for the West Coast than the East Coast. So my question is, as if there's people who grow seed in the group, is how can we improve on-farm seed saving so that to have seed that it has higher quality, and I'm wondering what's the difference between like artisanal seed production for lettuce and like, commercial kind of like not industrial, but just a larger scale seed production, and what are the differences between in terms of practices?
It's funny. One of the things I had thought of, Hugo, is these seeds came from some small regional seed companies, and the cleaning mechanism can often, increase the quality of the seed. So even if genetically the variety is good, you could be getting seed that has immature seed as well as good seed, and running it through something like an air separator can really increase the quality a little bit. So I don't know if we had data on anything like that to that detail, but that would be kind of interesting to see. Did you?
I think probably
Yeah.
germination and vigor are probably the most indicative of seed quality.
Yeah. We had one trial that we did where we had 2 seed sources of the same variety, and they were significantly different. Like one was at the top and one was at the bottom. So yeah, seed source, hugely important. And also when we do our trials, sometimes I'm going off of lettuce for a second, but sometimes I don't know, I just find that sometimes I feel like the lettuce is a bit older from some places and others, and like I don't know, I don't know how to get all the varieties to be equal when it enters the trial, and if that matters.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment, like one of the challenges, say with germination, and I'll just be blunt here, is like it's hard to know whether it's the seed and whether it's the grower. I mean, no matter how skilled you are as a grower or unskilled, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of experience. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I'm so busy, you miss one day of watering and germination on a crop is affected. So that's why I'm really interested in looking at So I mean, as a trial manager, I'm looking at seedlings data all the time. And when I see that I've got a crop germinating perfectly fine and somebody else, it's not germinating well, I mean, I think to myself, well, something's up with their conditions. If the seed is going to be uniform amongst what we distributed, so the likelihood that I got a whole bunch of good seed and someone else got a whole bunch of bad seed is almost impossible. So if we're seeing that some people are getting 5s and some people are getting 1s on the same variety, that's going to be more likely be environmental. So too hot, too cold, not watering enough, the wrong mixture, something like that. So those are, I think the data can be really useful for that, for understanding that stuff. All the seed came to us looking pretty good. We actually did have some seed come to us that was atrocious looking. And I got in touch with the company. I think it was just a packing mistake on their part, but it was just a kind of a weird thing. So it wasn't usable. But other than that, seed came like really good looking, and the seed all seemed to have good seed weight and whatnot. So, but yeah, we do not know the age of the seed that came to us.
John, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just kind of question on like how can we trust the outcome, and what kind of conclusions in looking at the results of these trials, what is appropriate for any individual farm to draw from the conclusions? I mean, my assumption is that the statistics that gets done on these trials is enough in some cases to weed out if one farm had a slightly poor germination, and to weed out whether, and maybe my assumption is wrong, like how strong is the statistic analysis that's done on these trials when they present us with the results, for us to trust that it's not individual farms having missed a watering day. Or I guess I don't know if that's a coherent question, but can you understand what I'm getting at?
Yes, thank you so much, John, for the question. Yeah, so for the statistical analysis, I had 50 participants, so that's all the data I had, and I just use all of them. You're right. Sometimes there is limitation in statistical analysis, but we should also trust. At least I trust the statistical analysis I ran. But you're definitely right. What we present as the result, so we tell you what data we use and how we run the analysis. We will have that in our report. But it's for your reference. And personally, I suggest that you will also look into your own data. You can compare that to the national results, but you can also make the decision based on what you get. I think that's why we try to include farms from different locations, and but there is limitation, like there is that many farms that we can include. Obviously more data points will be better, but there is limitation. So yeah, and like for example, we do see when we compare the UBC data to the national data, we see some similar results, but we also see different results. So I will suggest to make the decision considering all the factors, not based on just one result.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I mean, the thing about seed linked is, I mean, when you really get into it, I mean, you take your impression of a variety. I'll just use magenta, which ranked really high in places. So if it really did well for you, and then you wanted to see how it did for others as a sort of a reassurance that you're making the right decision. And then when you get into seed linked, so I sort of clicked on the variety, and then I just see notes like, we also grew a control using a magenta we got from high mowing, and this one was better than that one by quite a lot. So, I mean, we're seeing other things that confirm the value of a variety. And so I would also do the same thing with, I mean, there's two varieties we did at UBC Farm that to me, I'm just like, I would never even consider growing those again. I don't know if they're variety issues. I don't know if it's just the seed quality from the grower. I mean, I don't know what those things are, but my impression is very, not good. But what I would go do is now go, okay, well, what did other people rank and comment on this variety? Because maybe I'm missing out of something that I just didn't see. And maybe the edge effect had more of an impact than I realized, or coincidentally, which does happen, like just the 3 random plots were just in 3 crappy spots. So, I mean, if I was to go through and see other people rated it high and made some really useful comments, I might give them a second chance. So it can work in both ways. So seed linked is really powerful for that, and the number of not just the quantitative data, but the qualitative data as well, along with photos. I mean, there's a ton of photos in there, so you can see how stuff did in other environments.
Yeah, I'll just make one other comment. In the presentation of some of the slides there, it might be nice if there was little thumbnails of the lettuce pictures to go with the names. I harvested and grew, especially on a course like this where there's 12 varieties, and we're doing this seminar in December. And just to jog my memory on what named variety was, because I have good picture memories, but so I can kind of equate the names of varieties to the to what actually grew. Might be nice to have little thumbnails of some of the varieties.
Thank you
Great.
for that comment.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. John, you can, I know it'll be way easier if the reports have thumbnails, but you can go into SeedLink, as Chris mentioned, and click on the pictures to remind yourself. That's a bit onerous though, so that's a great suggestion.
Janine, you also had a comment about photos. Don't say your.
Yeah, I was just trying to find the raise hand button. I noticed that seed linked, like not all of the not all the photos from the seed company. Sorry, I can't get my questions straight now. Some of the varieties didn't have photos initially. I know they were populated by users over the course of the season. However, it's unclear what a full head size. I know it's a subjective measurement, but if there are growers that are less experienced conducting this trial, it might be nice to have an example photo for each variety that gives a sense of what a full head size is supposed to look like.
I'm curious on the question of maturity, whether, you know, another information we're getting from seed companies is the date to maturity, the DTM. And I'm wondering if, and the challenge I see with trials is that farmers are harvesting their crop all at the same time. And there's not necessarily like, and at least in Quebec, where it's hard to get precise DTM because it involves visiting the plots like over a short period of time just before harvest. I'm wondering if you noticed, Chris, in at UBC Farm, differences, or if we've compared the dates to maturity from the seed companies with actual dates to maturity at the UBC Seed Farm.
So I mean, going back a little bit, so when we chose the varieties, we did choose stuff that had a similar range of days to maturity. So there were some varieties, for example, that were like one variety was like 70 days and one was 40 days that we wanted to include, but we didn't because they were outliers. So everything I think was in about a 10-day window. I didn't specifically look at like, is today the 57 days or 60 days, because DTMs aren't that accurate. But my thinking, my working theory was, because these all have about the same DTM, they should all mature at around the same time. And that's exactly what happened, with the exception of one that just didn't perform well and never actually really fully matured. So at the time when everything seemed to be, should have been mature, everything was mature, sizes were kind of all over the place. And I think it's a good point, Janine, like I mean, for those of you that had a good Gentilina, I didn't know lettuce could get so big. The thing was massive. Whereas Sangria was a nice head, but it was smaller. So maybe I could have, you know, gotten that information from the seed packet or the descriptions. But yeah, it kind of points towards maybe having a guide to what size looks like, which will be variable. And also, as John said, like maybe having some more photos there. The photos auto-populate in the variety according to SeedLinked. And we can follow up with Nico just to make sure there's something in there, and they're very responsive. So we can make sure they're there for next year, I think, for sure.
I think it was more of an issue for me because things were so slow. And so I was waiting and waiting and kind of trying to like eke out, okay, maybe that can count as like marketable size or harvestable size, but it was really stretching things a lot. So it kind of made me focus on that point a little more.
As a farmer, days to maturity are always confusing to me. I always thought if that information doesn't come with a planting date and a latitude, it's not all that effective or, you know, useful. Because I know I can plant at different times and get very different days to maturity. I think the fact that they're all similar was probably useful for the trial. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining. We will find out soon if this trial is going to happen again next season. And if it does, we'll have pictures of what all the varieties look like already. So we'll be one step ahead. Thanks, everyone.